I've looked at a couple of SpongeBob games, and I've looked at a few games that have some sort of focus on dreams. So, what happens when you combine both of those concepts? Well, you get the topic of today's video, Creature from the Krusty Krab. God, the title of this video is going to be like a mile long, isn't it? This one's going to be a bit different than my looks at BFPB in the movie game. Not really structurally, more so in tone. I love those games. I have a strong nostalgic connection to them, and I think they still hold up today. And I like to think that that love shows through those two videos I made. Alternatively, Creature from the Krusty Krab, while I have nostalgia for it too, is a much messier experience that I find, unless the imagery especially speaks to your tastes, won't do much for you. Don't get me wrong, it's a completely functional video game. I'd even say it's better than mediocre, but it's... well, we'll get to that later. For now though, we should probably take a step back and take a look at this game's interesting development history. A lot of what you're about to hear is information I got from another YouTuber called Who Needs Normal, who made a really extensive look at Blitz Games' history alongside the development history of Creature from the Krusty Krab. I'm basically going to give the Cliffs Notes version of some of that information, so if you're interested in this topic, you should totally check out that other video. It goes more in depth about this than I'm about to. It'll be linked in a card somewhere on the screen and in the description. Moving on, originally Creature from the Krusty Krab started as SpongeBob 40 Winks. The concept was sort of similar to what Creature from the Krusty Krab would eventually become, but for the most part it was a very different game. Instead of going through SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton's dreams and playing as the three of them through various different gameplay styles, you would play as just SpongeBob and have to save all of his friends as they were all trapped in their dreams by, well, also going through various different gameplay styles. Blitz games were kind of known for doing that, honestly, especially with their licensed titles. What you did in the dream worlds would also end up affecting the real world, which combined with the saving your friends from their dream worlds concept leads me to why I even brought up Creature from the Krusty Krab's development history. Barely any of the original 40 Winks concepts made it into the final game besides the obvious being about dreams thing. Other than it being an interesting but small tidbit about video game history, it barely has anything to do with the final game. But it does have something to do with a different SpongeBob game, one that I plan to talk about sometime in the future. I figured I'd set that up now rather than then because I like blueballing you people. Anyway, let's move on to the meat and potatoes of this discussion. I figure starting with the story probably makes the most sense, so we're going to talk about the music first instead. Hey, if the game is going to be structured all weird, then I get to structure my video all weird too. It's only fair. And what a soundtrack this is. In fact, I'd go as far to say that this is one of my favorite video game soundtracks, period. It was all composed by Matt Black, a frequent collaborator with Blitz Games it looks like, and the guy did a bang-up job. Seriously, just give some of these a listen. And I think it meshes really well with the art direction, which is why we're going to talk about the gameplay now. And man, is there a lot to talk about here. You ever play a game with like 10 different game styles in it that isn't a minigame collection? That's what Creature from the Krusty Krab is. There's standard 3D platforming, kart racing, 2.5D platforming, on-rail shooting, fucking kaiju stuff, and all of that is in addition to usually some added gameplay style like puzzle solving. And then there's the minigames that you play between levels, which adds even more shit to the game. Normally I'd be annoyed by this kind of whiplash, but thankfully the game manages to keep itself very short and very simple. It's paced mostly well, except for Alaskan Belly Trouble. I always thought that part of the game went on a little too long. It's also probably the ugliest part of the game. I say ugliest in air quotes because part of me kind of loves how gross this looks. We'll get more into the visuals later. Something I really don't love about this game though is the overabundance of tutorialization, to the point of it actually getting on my nerves every so often. Too frequently will the game take you out of gameplay either with a small cutscene or text blurb on the screen, and it really fucks with the pacing sometimes, which is why I added the mostly qualifier earlier. Not enough to be a deal breaker, but still enough to be a noticeable problem. And yes, you can turn the text blurbs off at least, but they also can give useful information to the player sometimes that they otherwise wouldn't have known. I think an easy fix to this would just be to make it so that the text blurbs are more concise and don't pause the game every time they show up, and the game actually does do this sometimes. It's wildly inconsistent, whatever. Oh, and just cut down on all of those in-game cutscenes, or at least make it so I can play while they're happening.
Hello, phone dude.
Hello? Hello?
There's something in this game for everyone. It's a jack of all trades, if you will. Thing is, people tend to forget or sometimes leave off the other half of that saying, which is master of none. And no better set of words describe this game's variety of gameplay styles. None of them are done poorly, but there's no doubt in my mind that if there were less of them, the few that remained would probably have ended up better. Although, on the other hand, part of why Creature from the Krusty Krab is so interesting to discuss is due to its large amount of variety for a game like this. It's a double-edged sword, almost. And I could go over each gameplay style one by one, but realistically I don't have much to say about them individually. Like I said, said, they weren't made poorly, they're competent even, but that's all they are. It's the total package of all this different gameplay that makes the game so discussable, for lack of a better word. I will say though, the ending portions of the game, while still not the best the gameplay could be, are extremely memorable due to their larger scale than the rest of the game, more specifically the giant Plankton sections. There's something extremely cathartic about playing as this huge monster just destroying stuff because you can. Other games have done this concept better, like Psychonauts for instance, but it's still an absolute blast here regardless. And despite the gameplay maybe not being perfect, I still find myself coming back to Creature from the Krusty Krab from time to time. Not anywhere near as often as BFBB or the movie game, but still enough that clearly something must still be gripping me. If you have working eyes and read the title, I'm sure you can guess what that is. But I'm gonna hold off on that just a teensy bit longer for the sake of being annoying. For now, we'll get into the game's story and writing. We'll start with the writing, and it's surprisingly good, I'd say even on the same level as BFBB. The character interactions are a lot of fun to listen to, which is in turn helped by the amazing performances of our three main leads, Tom Kenny, Bill Fagerbakke, and Doug Lawrence. Bill especially, who plays every character in Patrick's first level, Starfish Man to the rescue.
Must stop the train and get him dressed. But how? Excuse me, don't you have super strength? Hey, good idea!
But yeah, the writing is pretty solid. My favorite parts of the writing come at the end of the game, where all three of our mains get to finally interact, and how they constantly argue and bicker with each other.
What's it like being in my dream, Patrick? I bet it's pretty cool.
Oh, don't be silly, Dream SpongeBob. It's my dream, not yours.
Which, I suppose, leads us into the story. On one hand, it's told no more extravagantly than its predecessors. On the other hand, it's still kind of batshit insane. It's not the weirdest thing I've ever seen in games, or really any art, but it's definitely trying and succeeding at being very strange. And for a game that's all about playing through dreams, I would hope that it was. The basic rundown is that SpongeBob, Patrick, and Plankton are all having various dreams, all based on different sects of popular culture like comic books or classic monster movies. A common through line, though, is this giant living Krabby Patty. As the game goes on, it becomes the central focus and sort of overarching villain? I don't know. And eventually, all three of our dreamers' dreams start to melt into one until they all come face to face with the
sandwich of their nightmares.
This culminates in a big race to the finish between our three leads to see who gets the patty once and for all, and to see whose dream this really is. You see, there's a bit of a mystery that comes into play once the characters' dreams start meshing together. Is this SpongeBob's dream? Maybe it's Plankton's, or maybe it's Patrick's. That's a mystery I don't plan to reveal the answer to here, because I'm a dick. Play the game if you want to find out. Or don't, I'm not your dad. Bringing up the race does actually remind me of another gameplay thing I want to bring up real quick. Sleepy Seeds. These little bouncing jelly guys are hidden collectibles that are in every level. Collecting all of them lets you play as Patrick and Plankton in the final level, which in turn significantly affects the route you take in the race, and also the ending if you win as one of them. It can be pretty easy to miss some of these little guys, but there's some helpful tools the game provides that should make them less frustrating to find. For one, there's this little symbol that'll flash on your screen faster and faster the closer you get to a Sleepy Seed. You can also replay levels individually in free play if you missed any, similarly to LEGO games. The one the game doesn't do that I wish it did was let you pull up a tally of the Sleepy Seeds collected whenever you want, like how BFBB in the movie game did for stuff like this. Weirdly enough, there is a tally, but it only shows up for a short time at the beginning of the level, and after that, only when you've already picked up a Sleepy Seed. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's a little annoying. Speaking of being annoying, I'll finally get to, at least for me, the main appeal of Creature from the Krusty Krab. This game just has so much style. Sure, it doesn't pull it off perfectly, but I'm honestly just impressed by the willingness to try. Most licensed games from this era just try to play it safe and keep the games focused on what the target demographic would already know. Even licensed games I really love are guilty of this. They'll have new stories, but with little to no new cast additions, and really no new scenery or visuals either. Being fair, Creature from the Krusty Krab really doesn't have new characters either, but 2 out of 3 still ain't bad. Of course, whether that variety of visual style makes up for the not-so-special gameplay is up for debate. I still think it's admirable that Blitz even tried to do something so weird and out there with a very well-established IP at that point. And that focus on style really makes every level stand out. They all have so much identity. Like, the racing sections at the beginning of the game look straight out of Rob Zombie's sketchbooks, or the superhero sections being based on Golden Age superhero comics and pop art of the 60s, or the later Plankton sections having classic monster movies as their inspiration, even having harsh shadows and film grain to match. Even the loading screens are designed to match each section of the game. It's so cool. It's crazy how good this game can look sometimes, and how not so good it looks other times. The cutscenes are a good example of that, I think. Sometimes they're lit really well and have this super moody atmosphere and the animation is surprisingly good, and other times... And I'll admit, I'm biased. I honestly like this weird janky look, but I completely understand why this is off-putting to a lot of people. Although when the game looks good, it looks so good. I'd say the Starfish Man to the Rescue levels best exemplify this. From the use of poppy flat colors to all of the shading using Ben-Day dots, this shit was Spider-Verse before Spider-Verse to me. It's a nice touch that Patrick's outfit changes every time you attack also, just wanted to point that out. Does all of this attention on the style make up for the game's overall just okayishness? Maybe? I don't know. What I do know is that it's enough for me. Hell, that's pretty much the same reason I love the Jet Set Radio series, although those games are definitely better than this one. You should play Bomb Rush Cyberpunk. With all that said, I think it's time to wrap this up. As shown off in the title of this video, and even as alluded to earlier, Creature from the Krusty Krab is 100% style over substance. But man, sometimes, just sometimes, that's all I'm asking for. It won't top almost anyone's list of SpongeBob games, let alone games in general, but it still has a strange, special place in my heart due to just how much I love how much it tries to do something so drastically different to its contemporaries, even if all it really succeeded at was just looking cool and being kinda weird.